it's Bear Gardener. I'm back with another detailed video on play method and strategy for Classic Archetype. This is the second one I've done, more will be coming. Firstly, thanks for all the support in the previous one, which was my Frontline one. It'll all be in the same playlist now, links down below. I am a cards player, content creator, streamer, a veteran of various forms of competitive game for more than 30 years and tabletop gaming in general. So we're just going to dive in and talk about the deck. So we're going to look at the Brit US Ramp deck. So this is, well, I suppose the ultimate question is, what's Ramp? Why Ramp? By ramp, we mean a deck that builds resource, or in this case, credit advantage quickly through either credit acceleration or credit cheating or other methods of getting access to more resources early, and uses them to leverage usually either big units or particular cards to win the game. The Brit US ramp deck that we're going to look at actually leverages two possible win conditions, the primary of which, and the one that it's built on, is the idea of using high-cost bombers with heavy impact early in the game to finish off your opponent. So, the method is pretty simple. Let's take a look at the deck and talk through the strategy. So here we are, into my current preferred list. Now, as with all of my lists, there will be some variations. People play things different ways, people include some things, don't include other things. But I, generally speaking, include this as the list that I think works best for me. So, first thing to do is talk about what we're aiming to do with ramp and what we have in here that does that. So let's actually look at some ramp cards. This is a good example. This is War Machine, so we spend 2 credits and get 1 extra credit slot. I'm spending 2 credits now, so that next turn, instead of having, if we're playing this on turn 2, instead of having 3 credits next turn, we would actually have 4. We include those. We've also got ASW Patrol, which gives us 3 extra credit slots, and if the US is our ally, which it is, destroys a random enemy unit. It's another strong one. There are other cards that you can include. I find that these do the job just fine, but you could use from the US. There is also In Hour of Need, which is 4 cost, gain 2 extra credit slots. Perfectly valid card, especially if you don't have access, so don't like running ASW Patrol, which is way more expensive, but I don't find it usually too difficult, as you'll see when we get to gameplay later on, to get access to it. Ways to win in this deck, so we'll start with what I was talking about before. So we have quite a lot of high cost bombers, so if we look at our credit spread, we have lots of orders, but almost all of our units are 7 cost or 5 cost. Big, expensive units. And of these, the important ones are the bombers. So we have things like Halifax, we've got Wellington, a Flying Fortress, and we've got the Lancaster. We'll get to these properly in a minute. So instead of piecemealing it, we're going to go through the deck now, part by part, card by card, and talk about what each card is doing for us. So this is 85 Pioneer Company. This is a 1 cost, 4 op cost, 0-4 unit with smokescreen that is there for its basic text effect, which is your orders cost 1 less credit to a minimum of 1. This is great value for us because we're going to play quite a lot of orders to both control our opponent and take advantage of that control to gain more credit access. Production Order. This is an integral card to the deck. This is a 1 cost order, and you then get to choose to either add a B24D or a B24J to your hand. B24D will hop on screen momentarily, is a Blitz bomber, 6/5 and costs 3 less to deploy if you control a 3 operation cost or higher unit, which you probably will. So this can become a 4 cost, 3 op cost Blitz bomber that does 6 damage. It's amazing. Also has heavy armor. 24J, 6/5 heavy armor. The difference is instead of having Blitz and a discount for deployment, it suppresses all enemy units, thus turning off all their buffs. Both of these bombers are useful. As a finisher, we're often going for the B-24D. I will endlessly talk about the fact that I don't believe that playing this card turn 1 is generally a good idea. I see a lot of people do it, go to turn 1 and they will drop production order and put a B-24D in their hand, ready to win the game later. In theory, because you haven't got a lot else to do with your 1 credit on turn 1, why wouldn't you do it? It's credit efficient. The reason you wouldn't do it, and the reason I don't do it, is that this is a utility card. The 24J is incredibly powerful if your opponent has a lot of buffs on the board or units with effects that you want to turn off. Because it only costs us 1 credit to activate the choice between the 2 bombers, by the time we need to play this, odds are we can afford to both play the order and play the bomber and attack with it. We probably have the 8 credits that would be necessary to play the card and get full effect out of the bomber, which is either drop an attack or it plays onto the board and we get the suppress. So I husband this because I only have 2 of them in my deck. They are specials and I want to use them efficiently, and the 24J can be the game saver against certain archetypes. Particular if you get a Soviet tokens deck that runs mad crazy out of control with Baronovici, which will happen a lot. This can just wipe that board down to 1/1s that don't have Alpine, and turn off the Baronovici and leave your opponent with lots and lots of units on the board that they need to sack out before they can actually start rebuilding a board state. Next up, we have Naval Power. I run through these. This is a 1 cost order that pins an enemy unit and gives your HQ +3 HQ defense. It is a delaying tactic. We're going to use this a lot because it is going to slow our opponent down. So there is no point as building credit advantage by ramping if in the time it takes us to ramp our opponents ripped our HQ down to 0 and we've lost. So we will apply delaying tactics. Naval Power is a very good one. War Machine. 1 extra, as I said before, 2 cost, 1 extra credit slot. Absolutely integral card to this. In an ideal world, we mulligan hard for this card because really we want to play this turn 2. There's a very good argument for mulliganing everything in your hand if you haven't seen this. Not always the way I play, but a lot of the time it will be, because you really want to be able to start gaining credit advantage. M3A3 Honey. This is another effectively defensive tool, and we have a few of these in the game that we are going to use to leverage to keep ourselves alive. The Honey is a 2/3 tank. It doesn't do anything massively interesting, and we're probably not going to be using it offensively, but what it does do is gives our HQ +1 defense every time we draw a card. More HQ defense, we're around longer. The longer we're around, the more likely we are to ramp up and get to our win condition. Also, more HQ defense gets us closer to our secondary win condition, which we'll get to later. Crusader Mark II. I run 1 of these, some people run 2. When you give a British order, draw a card. We're going to be giving quite a lot of British orders, and card draw is never bad. Plus, if we have this and a Honey on the board, then this is not only drawing us a card, but it's drawing us a card and getting us HQ defense. It's a great card to have. I can see a reason to run 2. I just personally don't find I have room to run 2. And I don't often find I need them, and if I do have both of them on the board at the same time, I'm usually risking overdraw, because we're not always going to be playing out all of the cards in our hand. Supply shortage. This is an incredibly potent tool. Enemy units receive 1 damage at the start of their owner's turn. Amazingly powerful. Just ticking time bomb on big enemy boards, and we have a way of accelerating that, which we'll get to later. Convoy HX-175, this is the archetypical draw card of the game, and a card we will use a lot. Pay 3, draw 2 cards. Simple stuff, very effective. Fortification, another one we run 4 of. This one gives our HQ plus 7 defense. Again, outlasting our opponent gives us a chance to get to our win condition. Sincerely yours. Very similarly, HQ defense plus 6, but it also draws cards. This is like a combo of the last 2 cards for only 1 point more, and we only lose 1 point of HQ defense. It's amazing. It's an elite for a reason. Speaking of elite for a reason, Sexton. This card can win games, especially for this deck, because this can give you the ability to turn off a big threat while you remove smaller threats or pin them down, and just remove that unit from relevance, whilst at the same time giving you access to 3 points of damage, which doesn't care about guard. The key is the deployment effect. Pin an enemy unit at the start of your turn, pin that unit again. As long as this thing is alive, the unit that is pinned is never going to be able to act, unless you suppress it. The Glamour Boys. I run 2 of these. There is an argument to run more, but I find 2 is plenty. They've recently been slightly adjusted, so if you've come to this from my beginner videos, again the links below into the early game and beginner versions and of this deck are available. This unit has had its defense reduced by 1. It's still bonkers good. 5 cost for a 3/6 with guard. That also gives you HQ defense. It's crazy strong. It probably won't stay this strong for a lot longer, but we will see. Monsoon Rot. So earlier on I said we had a way of accelerating supply shortage. This is that way. For 9 credits, which we can usually get access to because we're ramping, we can in fact clear every enemy unit on the board, regardless of size, because we drop all of their defenses to 1 and they take a point of damage at the start of their turn. It's incredible. It's also good, by the way, for blunting. If you have a guard up, your opponent has high damage units that they want to trade into that guard. They can't trade efficiently if everything they attack with dies. First bomber on the list is the Wellington. It's an elite, 7 cost, 3 op cost blitz bomber. So 10 credits to operate for a 4/3 bomber, which seems kind of pricey until you read its base text. If in your hand, this unit costs 2 less each time you give an order. To a minimum, by the way, of 0. So it is perfectly possible and often the case that we will play this for 0 and attack for 3. 4/3 bomber activating for 3 credits on blitz. Pretty good. Well worth having in your deck. ASW Patrol, this is our second ramp card. It's a later game ramp card, but it's also an incredibly powerful control card. 3 extra credit slots, and destroy a random enemy unit. A lot of the time when we play this, it's not random at all, as we've got to the position where we're down to there being like 1 big threat left on the board, and then we play this, and we not only gain credit slots, but we also remove the big threat. Always run 2 of these. Argument for running 3, but I think it's a bit heavy to do so. Halifax. This is an incredible card. This card will win us games. The Halifax is an 8 cost, 3 op cost bomber that doesn't blitz. It's only 5/4. However, its text is incredible. Bombers you deploy, including this one, deal their attacking damage to a random enemy. Now, they don't attack the enemy. That is important because they deal the damage, which would ignore any heavy armor. That random enemy is not a random enemy unit, it is a random enemy, so it can include your opponent's HQ. So when you drop this on the board, it does 5 damage. If you drop this on the board and your opponent has just been board wiped, it does 5 damage to their HQ. Then next turn you can pay 3 to fire this at their HQ for another 5 damage, and any bomber that you drop will also deal their damage to the HQ. Incredibly strong and basically a big part of our win condition. We run 2 of them for that reason, so that we can enhance big bombers. Speaking of big bombers, B-17 Flying Fortress. I run 1, you could run 2. It's incredible. It is a 9-3 heavy armoured bomber that's 5-5. The big thing is it also deploys a random unit on... destroys a random unit on deployment. Again, this is a powerful tool for us because we want to control the board. Lancaster, I like this. You can run varying numbers, and this is the ultimate substitute for any big bomber that you don't have in this deck. As I talk about in the budgeter versions of this deck, this is an incredible substitute. There are some great bombers out there, but this one is perfectly fine as it is. 9-3, so obviously it's 12 credits with its blitz, but we're probably going to have that, and it's 7 damage. Really good. Plus, if you have Halifax on board, it's 7 damage to a random enemy. If you have 2 Halifaxes on the board, it's 14 damage when you deploy it, plus the 7 from it, which is 21, which can be game. Finally, we run an alternate win condition in my current version of this deck. We run the Commonwealth because we will, quite often, just happen to fulfill the criteria. We're not building crazy towards this. We're not including 4 copies of Glamour Boys, 4 copies of Fortification, 4 copies of anything else that we can get, max copies of anything else that we can get, plus all of the US stuff that we can fit, anything that we can fit in to get HQ defense, which you can do and ramp towards Commonwealth. But because we often get into the position, this is a useful tool to have. A lot of the time we won't actually use it. We'll win the game through our standard strategy because there'll be some trading and we won't hit the 30 HQ defense, but for 1 card, I consider this worth having for the use cases where it wins me a game. Also, we're ramping so quickly that we can play this surprisingly early. It's really strong. It's also really good, by the way, if you happen to be in a match against someone who is hard gaining HQ defense. It doesn't have to win you the game, but it can bring your enemy's HQ defense back within range of you bombering it out for a win. So this is the deck. As I say, the strategy is pretty clear, which is use our ramp cards to get access to the right tools to then deal heavy damage late in the game, but we bring the late game, earlier game, through ramp. There are lots of choices that you could throw in this. In particular, if we just go and look at big bombers. I'll pop this for... These are all the big bombers. There's the Lancaster. This is not necessarily a bad include. 7-3 has Blitz. When this damages the enemy, an HQ, cards in the enemy hand cost +1 credit. Can be really powerful. Sometimes run it, sometimes don't. I am known to occasionally switch out bombers. You could certainly put the Lancaster B3 in for one of your Lancaster Mark 1s. Flying Fortress, as I say, you could double up on. The Liberator is not a bad substitute if you have room for it either, but it doesn't have Blitz, so the Flying Fortress is generally better. There are also the smaller versions, Sunderland, Stirling, these are all in there, but I wouldn't necessarily... Ultimately, we're not needing to include lots of them. We're just needing to include enough of them to win us the game. Everything else in this deck, as I mentioned, is about controlling the battlefield, ensuring that your opponent doesn't beat you before you have reached the point whereby you beat them. So that's the deck. That's the strategy. As I say, the nuance tends to be in timing carefully. Things like when you use your pins versus just eating a little bit of damage to your HQ early on because you know you'll get it back. Saving your pins and control cards for when they're going to do you the most good. Also, knowing, as I say, when to use production order and get the best value out of it and get the bomber that's going to win you the game versus the bomber that should win you the game, but then, oh dear, there's an issue and you can't suppress. We don't run any of the suppress mechanics in this because I don't feel the need to, because I have production order. The strategy is pretty much be patient, keep yourself alive, and once you've ramped up, you will be in control. It's a great deck to play. It's pretty solid. It's a slower game than perhaps you will be used to on other decks, but I think you'll find success with it. I hope you find this useful. that is enough of me waffling on about this. What we're going to do now is cut to the good stuff and do some gameplay so you can see me playing this deck, and I will talk about the methodology and mentality of all of the things and choices that I make while playing this deck. So let's cut and find the footage. So into gameplay, and we'll have some commentary as usual on the way that I'm thinking while I'm playing. Game 1. As usual, first thing we're thinking about when we see the board come down is, what have we got? We've got US, so could be another ramp deck, which is always a tough matchup, but winnable. I think the edge is still on the Brit ramp. It's also often quite likely to be frontline, so I shall wait and see what we get. Looking at our hand, our biggest issue here is we're not seeing any ramp, which is never a good sign. We don't mind a honey. Honey is always good, but we really want to see some ramp. This is a pretty terrible mulligan. We've ended up with 2 of the big bombers that we want late game. Sincerely Yours is a great card, but this is very, very early to be seeing it. So already we have to be thinking about being cautious about the way we play, being able to extend the game so that we can take advantage of what our deck does, especially against frontline, which this might well be. Looking at the Greyhound, it probably is. Not a difficult play here. We only have the honey to play, and getting some HQ gain going is never a bad thing in this matchup. So we're thinking definitely frontline at this point, pretty clearly. So we've got War Machine. This is good. Straight play for us because ramp is what we're here to do. We don't worry about our opponent pinging us for a couple of points of damage. It's fine. We can recoup quite a lot of damage. Right, supply shipment. So this makes us rethink pretty quickly. We want to find an answer to this because that can get out of hand very quickly. ASW Patrol's not it. Right now, Sincerely Yours is just the best play. Now, pulling naval power here is amazing. This gives us an incredible control tool. So we're just going to control the unit that's threatening damage to gain some HQ defense. Works, just keeps it roughly under control. All we're doing here is we're stalling because we really want to be able to get to our big bombers, but we're just not seeing. We are, however, every time we play an order, we are seeing the Wellington go down in cost, which is one of the most important things, can be a very useful tool. No big surprise here. Once again, we're seeing classic frontline things happening. They've got a big wide board in front of us, which we're not a big fan of. We'd love to see a guard, but we don't have one. So at this point, we have to think what we can do here. We haven't got an instant board clear, but we do know that this is a board we want to deal with. So the calculation here is to play the Monsoon Rot, which is going to make sure that next turn we can get a very high value supply shortage off, which will also incidentally bring the Wellington into good range for deployment. Blitzkrieg, this is just a little unlucky, but we can regenerate. We can get HQ defense back. And the supply shortage we're about to play is huge. So we're in a great position here. Supply shortage brings us into really strong territory. Now I choose to be pretty clear about this. I have the credits, so I can drop the Wellington and remove everything. So we have a total board clear, which should give us the opportunity to make use of the fortification that we've just pulled. So we're going to take a whack to the face. That's okay. We knew we were going to. Sexton's beautiful here. Our opponent only has 1 unit on the board. Now we could just blow up the Hellcat using the Wellington, but I want the advantage so that I can get the tempo advantage later by having more presence on the board and being able to bring out more damage. So for me, this is Sexton very easily, which pins, and then we have fortification to bring us into safe range just in case they have anything else that they're going to drop. And now we're presenting effectively 7 damage a turn until they can get something in the front line to answer us. Good position to be in. And so we'll wait and see what their next result is. Sherman's fine, we're not worried because it's easily within range. We can just use the Wellington to remove it. Unless they have something else that they can add. Red Devils is... So far, their opponent's thrown 3 units. Now, that does mean that they are going to get 1 unit that can probably swing at us for a point of damage. We are going to take a point of damage because whatever we do, we can only remove 2 of these units. That's okay, though. We're not worried by that. So we will just clear using the bomber here. That takes 4 damage off the table. Might as well remove the Red Devils because they're already in the front. Now, this is where I've reached, and I know I talked about this earlier about when you play this card and what you're playing it for. I know now what I'm facing, and I'm expecting that I have the edge enough that I can now concentrate on getting big, heavy damage out. But I always want to be sure that I'm at the right time to play that card, not to just play it and hope. Panzer Grenadier is a really good play for our opponent here. They're going to be able to get a very powerful Panzer on the board. Unfortunately for them, even with combined arms, this is going to sit well within removal range, so they're smart enough to take out the bomber. They don't know what we have in hand. Lots of different things we can do here, but we're going to focus on using ASW Patrol because it both removes a threat and gives us ramp. As it turns out, we're super fortunate. We get the high roll and take out the big tank so that we don't have to double attack or sack. We could have sacrificed the honey, and if we didn't, there are various ways we could have removed that Panzer if we weren't able to get rid of it that way. As it is, Sexton is working so hard for us right now. It's every turn that Sexton has kept that Hellcat pinned has prevented 4 damage. And this is the power of having Sexton and using it well. 13 credits, so 14 next turn, which is 13 credits is a solid number to be on. So the M10 is going to silence, obviously, Sexton, which is a smart move. Our opponent needs to free up that damage. So now we're going to have to be a little bit more cautious because we have to make sure that we don't die. However, supply shortage is amazing right now. As I say, 13 credits to play with. The Halifax is going to randomly damage something. Always worth going for the roll. We can trade out here and here, which puts us in position to replace the honey. That sequencing gives us, once again, our opponent's only got 1 damage to operate. You'll notice, and it is worth noting, we are quite deep into the game, and I have not been worrying about hitting my opponent's HQ. We want to be in plenty of control with the big bomber run before we worry about that. The biggest thing we want right now is to just keep our opponent controlled. Devil's Brigade, now, this tells me, and it then did, but my expectation was that we would see Pathfinders here, because the Devil's Brigade plus the 1 point of ping, obviously the Pathfinders now is going to start triggering, because it will veteran, so we're going to want to do something about that. Thankfully, we have options in hand. So the Pathfinders is relatively easy to deal with, so we can afford a draw to see what we can come up with. Gets us a little bit more HQ defense. Obviously, remove the Pathfinders first. Supply shortage here. Now, supply shortage here is an interesting choice. I'm doing this because I know that I can sack the honey, because I have enough HQ defense gain in hand that I feel okay, and now that means that the Devil's Brigade, rather, is going to die at the start of my opponent's next turn, which is huge for us, and now we can just take the HQ defense gain, and our opponent still only presents 1 point of damage, and we still have artillery presenting 3. Our opponent also knows that we have a bomber in hand, and is running short of cards. So we know we've got the bomber. Our opponent throwing these 2 down is just... This is really rough for our opponent. We've outlasted them. We've stamina'd through to the point whereby they're kind of throttled for options. Now's when we can start to crack the pressure. So, remove the big threat. Flying Fortress will destroy something at random. Get a bit unlucky here, but it's fine. War Machine gets us more credits to operate with next turn, depending on what we draw, because we're going to want to be able to... So obviously at this point, because we've deployed the Flying Fortress, we can take advantage of the discount on the deployment of the B-24D. Naval Power's cool, gives us more HQ defense. B-24D comes down and we swing. And we might as well play the extra War Machine, just depending on what we draw next turn as to whether we get a big bomber that we want to throw. So we'll have 15 credits next turn, which is good. Really solid. Our opponent obviously throws down here. This isn't complicated. We have spend 8 credits, get lethal. So I'll send the well done. And this is pretty much the way that you want this deck to play out. This is actually pretty clinical. We get a good result. Just out-staminaing our opponent, then getting the win by virtue of the bombers and big credit advantage. So back in, I'm gonna look for some more opponent and commentary as usual. First thing we're doing, obviously, this is the Field Marshal card back. So until we see the HQ, we don't know what we've got. We have Danzig, so we have Germany. There's lots of different things this could be. Could be control, could be fast. There's lots of things that we could see here. Our opening hand again is pretty awful. We're not seeing any of the tools that we want to see. So we're going to want to pretty much pitch. This is not what we would call an ideal hand, and we can just hope for better. Commonwealth early is not great. But we have got some ramp and some draw, and we've got pin if our opponent has things, so it's fair. We're just going to ramp here. War Machine's ideal. Always be looking to do what this deck does. More credits is good because we can use them. There we go. Apparently I took a pause there. Not quite sure why. I may well have been catching something in real life. So we've got the numbers. So now we're in a good position. Sincerely Yours is just perfect here again. Our opponent has nothing on board, so lots of draw. And next turn we can look to Glamour Boys, which is always good. It's pretty much the strongest turn 5 that we can have. As a rule, sure, so our opponent is dropping a unit here. So our opponent has clearly had bad draw. So our opponent is dropping a unit that has a pincer effect with no target. It's not good times for them. So what's interesting is we are turn 5, and because our opponent has been very passive, so we are actually on turn 3, we're on 5 credits, but my point being our opponent has been incredibly passive, so we're already on 30 HQ defense, so this is already looking like a game that we may not necessarily need to win with straight ramped bombers. Ramping to the alternate win condition that is Commonwealth, if you have access to it, can be a good way of getting a win. In this case, that may well be the way that we do get the win. We also have Wellington in hand, and we have enough orders that we're going to be able to bring that down pretty efficiently too. So, at this point, ASW patrol next turn is a good shout, but right now, Hin, obviously. A few things we could do, but I choose to put the Wellington down covered here. I just want to present some damage and give myself more options next turn, potentially able to clear the whole board. Also, we might draw out some of our opponent's damage-dealing tech. So, looks like we might. So, in this case, we get Eagle Claws. Our opponent is trying to remove the bomber through the breach. Very expensive removal of a card that, honestly, we weren't that fussed about. We're now in really good position because ASW Patrol is incredible here. We are gaining 3 extra credit slots and destroying 1, also removing the pincer. Puts our opponent in a very tough position. At this point, I am looking at my credit counter and seeing how quickly can I get to 12 credits and just end this efficiently. Because unless our opponent can rip through the guard and do significant damage, we're probably fine. So we might want to think about alternate win condition. We have the 2 Halifax, so Halifax into Halifax is super strong, and obviously we have the spare credits. So 40 HQ defense, 2 Halifax in hand. This game's pretty much done, and we know it is. Eagle Claws again. Our opponent clears out the guard so that they can actually do some damage. Now we know that they need to do at least 11, but they're worried about the bomber. Granted, probably a good shout. There is no reason to do anything other than, so we're going to hit the alternate win condition. Just like that. Solid win. Okay, so into another game. As usual, the first thing we'll be looking for is what do we end up with as our opposition. So in this case, we see Japan. So this could mean aggro, various forms of combo or OTK. It's one of those things where we don't really know much until we see some cards. So looking at our hand, really we're not seeing any of our ramp tools. Honestly, this is pretty much an easy pitch. Production order, you could think a moment on and decide. I certainly had a moment, but it just didn't seem to have value. This doesn't get off to a good start at all. This is a very bad starting hand. We have 4 very late game cards, though 2 of them are ramp, and 1 control card that is slower than we'd like. So we're a little concerned here because we're seeing an early unit deployment. That also could be an issue, but we shall wait and see. Our opponent taking their time. We are just waiting patiently and considering. There's not a lot we can really do here. We just have to keep drawing and hope that we can get into some useful cards. This is one of those moments where I would encourage people to trust the deck. The cards are there. We know they're there. We've seen them many times before. We just have to remember that they are there to draw, and we'll get to them eventually. By this time, I am almost certainly wondering if my opponent has gone offline, but I wouldn't be commentating on this if that were the case. Our opponent just takes their time either thinking or is distracted, so they push for the front line and go for expansion. This is pretty classic Japan, suggests a relatively aggressive deck. Pioneer Company at least gives us something that we can put on the board. We're still not in an incredibly great position, and we do consider for a while about this because there is honourable death, which is strong removal, which could be bad for us, but really we're going to need the help to bring some of these orders down to reasonable play cost. And also to make sure that our draw cards cost less when they come through. Yep, classic aggro plays here, so we're seeing all of the big aggro tools come out. Our choice is pretty obvious here. We're kind of already aware that we're going to supply shortage because we need to start bringing the board down. Ironically, we draw another supply shortage, which, you know, always helpful. But we need to start bringing the board under control. So again, this is surviving. We are under pressure, and we're just looking to play defensively and stay in the game. Believe in the deck. Believe in the tools. Big drop for our opponent. It's off tempo, by which I mean that it's early on it or early curve, whichever you prefer. By which I mean that they're deploying the Panzer Grenadier. They don't have the credit to blitz it forward, nor do they have the credits to make use of the cards it draws. But at the moment, they know we're under real pressure, so they have no reason not to apply that pressure and show us their hand. Now, important thing here is not to snap judge. Now, you could immediately snap out another supply shortage, try and get that Panzergrenadier under control, but I'm expecting next turn to be big for them. So they're going to have 5 credits. I know they're going to play a 35T, and I know that it's going to get buffed. And then it's going to come forward and swing. I know that they're also going to then still have a spare 2 credits to do other things with. So I just dropped the honey. I'm going to just give them options. Part of the reason for dropping the honey is to get the HQ defense going if it ticks, if we draw. But also, I want to give them another target. I want to make our opponent think about what to do with the unit that we know they're about to drop. So we know that they're about to drop a 35T. We know that they're going to combine arms it into a 4-4. We know they're going to push forward and they can attack. I'm hoping that our opponent, instead of going straight for HQ, will swing for the honey, which they do. This is really important because it brings them 3 points closer to being within range of supply shortage, or rather death from supply shortage, which is good, because now we drop the supply shortage. They're going to lose 1 unit next turn. There is still 10 damage on the board, because they're going to be able to swing once with the 35T, and twice with the Panzergrenadiers for a total of 10 damage, which would leave us on 5 HQ defense. We are aware of this. However, we're not worried. We know we can get it back. Schutzen is a very strong unit, but we're not worried by it as much as we could be, because we're not likely to deploy a unit that Schutzen can attack to trigger its veteran effect. ASW patrol here, this is hit and hope. We would love to see the Schutzen blow up here. Sometimes you've just got to hope to get lucky. And we do. We needed the ramp regardless. We were in trouble otherwise, and sometimes you just have to trust, because we would have been in serious trouble and down to 1 HQ defense had that not happened, because if the Schutzen was still around, we could very well have been hit for 7. As it is, we now have 9 credits, 10 next turn, as our opponent's going to come swinging, which is absolutely understandable. We're down to 3 HQ defense. So on the face of this, this is very, very bad. Honorable Death removes this. Tough spot. This isn't great. As we look down at our hand, we have to start thinking. Now, Glamour Boys comes up and we just play it. We're just firing that out there because we want the guard and the HQ defense. The next question is, what do we do? Panzergrenadier's dying. We're going to use Sexton to control attack. This is not the perfect Sexton play, but it's a necessary one. We just want to give ourselves time. And obviously, having Sexton on the board also gives us 3 points of damage that we can aim at anything else that gets deployed, because we know our opponents are going to keep running units at us. We're not seeing any of our HQ defense gain in hand, which is a trouble. We've not got any draw either, so we know we're in a difficult position. So waiting to see what our opponent has to bring. Now, our opponent's Sendai Regiment's the guard here, which is not an ideal decision, because they can't actually swing. Now, if they'd Sendai Regimented the Sexton, they could have found a way to put some more board position in play, and they wouldn't be at risk of taking damage to their HQ. So, as we look now, we know Sexton can't attack Smokescreen. Always worth noting this. We'd love to, but we can't. ASW patrol, see if we get lucky. Sadly, we don't, but that's okay. So we've got 3 points damage to HQ. And we might as well. So at this point, production order, I've gone for the D because we're going to need the firepower, and we know that we're getting within range of being able to play it. And we've got the Halifax to gain the benefit. So this is putting us in a good position. Just getting into good habits. Not pinning the Sendai. Our opponent might be able to drop. So Signal Regiment is very tough here. Shiden we are in big trouble now. So we've got 3 HQ defense left, 1 unit on the board, and every unit that we kill is going to cost us. So every calculation we make from here on in, we have to be aware of the damage that we will take from the Signal Regiment. So we crack here. We know that we want to, because that means the Sheedan will die to supply shortage. Now, we know we're going to supply shortage anyway, because we really have to. We're going to naval power, because it gains us HQ defense. And then we drop. Get a little unlucky on the Halifax. I would have liked the Halifax to have hit the Signal Regiment, but such is life. But this does mean that our opponent now has to think carefully about the bomber that they know we have in hand. They need to do something about that Halifax, because dropping a B-24D right now would be very dangerous. Schutzen comes forward. Now, this is something we also need to do something about, but we do have the ability to do it. It's going to cost us, because obviously it's going to trigger. Divine Wind, very powerful, but they do lose their big salvage, so not a complicated decision here. We don't want to embrace randomness, so we're going to take the 24D and remove the Schutzen, take the damage that we know we're going to take, and then we're just going to plink. And just keep building. So we plink the HQ, gain more credits. 4 HQ defense, but we're still alive. As long as we're still alive, with ramp like this and the cards that we have in hand, we are in position to be effective. 2 turns from now, we're going to see the end of the Signal Regiment, which is going to make us very happy. Commonwealth does nothing for us here. As I mentioned, not always a card that we need. However, production order, this is the thing. Mathematics is a powerful force. 24D at this point is game, because we have the credits to fire it. Good game. Swing. This is pretty much the definition of the power of this deck. Supremely consistent. We can outlast our opponent. Trusting in the cards. We knew they were there. Job done.